Hi, my name's Rebecca Koscik, and I'm one of the statisticians on the RAP study. I'll be telling you today about some of the things we're learning related to patterns of cognitive aging. First off, I want to say thank you so much for all your dedicated participation. You all are extraordinary. Next, I want to say that just start out by saying fluctuations in cognitive performance are fairly common for all of us as we age in a healthy way. So much like we go up and down on a roller coaster, our day-to-day performance on the cognitive tests you take when you come in for a visit can change from day to day. Just like this figure at the right shows you 3 people from RAP who over 6 visits each have shown quite a bit of fluctuation in their memory performance, and all 3 of them remain in our cognitively unimpaired stable group. In this slide, what we see first, the black line represents sort of healthy aging. As we get older, some things slow down and we get a little worse on a few things, but not dramatically so. And this squiggly line might represent one person's trajectory as they move along and age healthily. Now, if somebody is on a trajectory towards dementia, that curve of cognitive performance begins to decline long before an MCI diagnosis or a dementia diagnosis. In fact, here at Wisconsin, we've been working on some criteria for diagnosing or identifying subtle declines that we call cognitively unimpaired declining upstream of MCI. And what are we finding in our RAP sample? Well, this is a good news slide. 96% of our RAP sample are still in this cognitively unimpaired category, either unimpaired stable or unimpaired with early signs of decline. And about half of the people who show this unimpaired declining status at one visit bounce back to the unimpaired stable category at their next visit. So overall, the RAP sample is doing really well. After each of your study visits, your data is brought to consensus review by a multidisciplinary clinician research team. And so all of your neuropsych data and other information about you is reviewed. And if there are signs of mild cognitive impairment or dementia, a phone call is made. Now, putting people in the categories at that visit is guided by the use of norms. And norms are essentially reference values that help us determine how you're doing relative to other people who are similar to you. We here in RAP have been able to develop internal norms, and they're RAP specific and adjusted for the same thing across all tests, and we feel that gives us better sensitivity with our data. Often in the literature, the norms that are available are cross-sectional. So your test score now is compared to other people's test score at a single time point. But you've been coming in, most of you have been coming in for many, many visits, and we've now developed norms that help us say, how is this visit performance relative to other visits you've already given us? In other words, we're figuring out how we're using statistical methods to determine how to understand within-person changes. How are we doing that? Well, we got the idea for doing this from growth charts. Many of you probably have children or grandchildren, and have you seen their height and weight and BMI plotted on these sorts of charts? This particular one shows the dark lines are centiles, or cross-sectional norms for BMI. And then each of the dots depicts a child's values at their 3 different ages, age 4, 6, and 8. And what we see here is that the centiles, the dots land on centiles 50, 79, and 87 over time. And what we want to know is that increase clinically worrisome in any way? In order to determine that, you need longitudinal norms. And here in RAP, we have extended these ideas from growth charts to cognitive data, and I'll show you an example next using our own internal norms. So in this slide, we're going to build up through some examples. This is an example of somebody who's been in RAP for over 12 years, and they progressed from cognitively normal or unimpaired to dementia over the course of time. The green lines represent their performance on each of 4 tests over time. The top two panels are memory tests. The bottom two panels are executive function tests. The dashed lines in each figure are the cross-sectional centiles. And now these brackets here identify the cross-sectional centiles that would indicate abnormal performance. And what we see is that for at least the first 4 visits, this person did not have any abnormalities based on cross-sectional centiles. But the red circles help us identify worrisome change relative to where a person started. And what we see here is that by visit 3, 5 years or so before the dementia diagnosis, 2 of the tests were showing worrisome change. And then by visit 4, all 4 of these tests were showing worrisome change, even though relative to cross-sectional centiles, the person was still doing fantastic. What we want to know, now that we can identify these things, is do these early signs of subclinical problems indicate higher risk of progressing to MCI or dementia? So in this slide, what we're looking at is just that question. We looked at people who started out unimpaired stable or unimpaired declining at baseline. So there was no evidence of clinical impairment. We had some people who had evidence of slight declines. And we looked how many in each group progressed to MCI or dementia as of their last study visit. And the people who were unimpaired stable at baseline, only 3%-ish, progressed to an MCI or dementia diagnosis compared to 13.5% of those who started with some subtle declines. So that tells us that showing some subtle declines does put you at increased risk of progressing to a clinical status. Now we also looked to see if higher lifestyle risk scores were associated with subclinical declines. And I know that you've already heard a little bit about the Libra index, so I won't go into detail on that. But what we saw was that for concurrent Libra scores, people who were in an unimpaired declining status had a higher percentage of elevated Libra scores compared to those who were unimpaired stable. So for each increase of 1 point in the Libra score, the risk of being in the declining category went up about 11%. Now, we've also extended this category of unimpaired declining to look and see, do people in this category show any evidence of the typical Alzheimer's biomarkers, such as amyloid? So in our sample of people who've provided PET scans for amyloid, we've had 262 for this analysis. We looked at what percent of people were amyloid positive in the unimpaired stable group, the unimpaired declining group, or in the clinical MCI or dementia group. And what we see is that as the degree of cognitive deficits increase, so does the percentage of people with amyloid positivity. In fact, people in the unimpaired declining group, 35% of them were amyloid positive compared to just 18% in the unimpaired stable group. And then similarly, some of you have provided PET scans for tau as well, and we looked at a similar question. Only 9% of people who provided tau scans were positive overall in the hippocampus. And then when we looked by cognitive status, we saw again that as the level of decline in your cognition increased, so did the percent of people who were tau positive. So only 5% of the people in the unimpaired stable group were tau positive, compared to 19% in the unimpaired declining group, and then 71% in the MCI group. Then just to recap everything I've told you about today, your participation is contributing to understanding subtle declines in aging well upstream of clinical impairment. And what we've seen is, on average, these subtle declines or deficits are associated with more lifestyle risk factors and more Alzheimer's risk factors. And as we get more biomarker data, we'll continue to examine and make sure these patterns hold up with larger sample sizes. But taken together, the contributions you're making by participating may help researchers develop interventions that can delay or prevent the onset of MCI or dementia. Thank you so much.